You know, that's up to Andy. We've had long discussions about player personnel, staff, and everything, and that's Andy's area, and he will make the best judgment of that. And I think he'll be addressing you guys soon on that, and I have full confidence he'll make the right decisions there.
Jeffrey, you talk about recent history. You know, you've been in the playoffs many times, but since your Super Bowl year, I think you've only had 2 seasons where you actually won a playoff game. How much of a factor is that you're making the playoffs, but you're not very often winning playoff games, at least recently?
Yeah, I think it is a factor in the analysis. I think you gotta, I think you have to factor everything in. We're not as successful the last few years as being in the championship game 4 straight years. There's no question about that. But there's plenty of teams that go from 8-8 or the edge of the playoffs, or not in the playoffs, and the next year win the Super Bowl. And I don't see that it's a road blockage there. It's if you look at what happened with New Orleans and after their 8-8 season, the Patriots a couple times, and Green Bay last year sneaking in at the end. It's a question of getting hot and getting right at the right time. And I feel bad this year we won't even be able to have that shot because we don't know how good we were.
Jeff, you said you support, I mean, you obviously support Andy, he's been here a long time, but you said you went through this analytical process where you talked to people. Were you more torn and conflicted about his fate this year than maybe in the past, or that you can remember?
Well, this was the most disappointing season in years, and I would say at Andy's tenure. Extremely disappointing, and so you go through an intense analysis. I do it every year. Unlike most franchises, it is not enough just to make the playoffs. That is not my goal. That's not our fans' goal. It's a precursor to be able to win a Super Bowl. You can't just jump to the Super Bowl, but this year was the biggest disappointment for me. So maybe it was the most intense analysis, yes, but it doesn't mean that there are seasons when we're in the playoffs. I don't go through this very same analysis because the goal is to win Super Bowls. It's not to get into the playoffs.
Jeffrey, who or what was the reason or accountable for the 8-8 record, since you obviously understand it's not acceptable?
Yeah, I think everybody's accountable. I mean, nobody in this building who is attached to the football team in any way feels good about it, and it's everyone's accountability. If I didn't think that next year would be substantially better, then I'd be standing up here and announcing a coaching change or other changes, and that's not what I think is going to happen. But
what
clearly,
what do you think the reason for 8-8?
I think there's, you guys are the experts and the analysts, but I think there were so many reasons, and none of them are legitimate excuses. When I come up with reasons, or you come up with reasons, that doesn't mean that's an excuse not to be better. But I think maybe there was a miscalculation in terms of implementing big scheme changes in a lockout situation. To me, I don't know why. I would have thought we would have been able to, during the abbreviated training camp and preseason, adapt to some of those schematic changes. They were bold changes, but clearly the team was not gelling and maximizing those scheme changes in the first half of the year. That's one that comes to mind right away. So, I would hold everybody accountable that's responsible for the scheme changes, yet there's a payoff once it takes effect and you gel and have it. So I think we saw tremendous benefits in the 2 lines, offensive and defensive, as the season went on, and we will benefit from that as we go forward. But first half of the season, it's just ridiculously unacceptable to have a fourth quarter lead and blow all those games. And if we just blew one less game, we'd be playing Atlanta next week. So that's where it's at.
Jeff, you talk about miscalculations. Obviously, that Andy had made. One being, I would assume, the name was Juan Castillo's defensive coordinator, guys who never coached on defense in the NFL, in light of the lockout happening, not having the foresight to see that this would have been a problem, obviously, schematically. You talked about the 5 fourth quarter losses. Do you support Andy's decision there to promote Juan?
The process was very different in reality. What Andy did was he made and I can't speak for him, but I know in our discussions he made a list of all the top people he was looking at to replace Sean McDermott as defensive coordinator. And You know, things happen, circumstances happen, changes don't happen on other teams, certain coaches aren't available, and he became very, very interested in Juan because he knew what he could accomplish. Whether he could accomplish it fast enough, I think, is an interesting question, and he didn't. The whole team didn't. So, you know, in terms of early in the season, the second half of the season, you know, what was it, a 6-2 record, and regardless of the competition you're playing. So I think when you analyze any decision of who is going to coach what, there's a lot of hidden background there in terms of where did that decision come from, what was the reason for it, what was the search process, who was truly available, and then move forward. And look, with Juan Castillo, I just say, anyone who's known this man for 17, 18 years, as we all have, incredibly impressive man, incredible family, and incredible coach. Was he put into a situation where he couldn't succeed early in the season? That's for us all to, you know, have answers to. It was a difficult process. So that's a long-winded answer to say I have a lot of respect for Juan, but it's a complicated process when you're going through that.
Jeff, do you anticipate Andy keeping him as the defensive coordinator?
Excuse me?
Do you anticipate Andy keeping him as the defensive coordinator?
Yeah, those are decisions for Andy. Those are completely Andy's decisions. We've had lots of talks about every aspect of the organization, and now it's up to Andy to you know, make those final decisions. He has the final say on that.
Jeffrey.
You mentioned a lot of different factors that went into your decision. One thing you did mention was the fans. And there seems to be a great fatigue about Andy, and you know, his popularity, as far as we can tell, is not really great. Did you take that into account, and how do you factor that in?
You know, I think you do factor it in. You're a football team that has lots of incredible fans, passionate fan base, and I think you do factor in that there's sometimes a disenchantment with a coach over a long period of time. I think you factor it in, but you got to put it in the right perspective. One of the very sort of disconnected aspects of Andy Reid, and he's as you all know, a pretty interesting guy, but when you're trying to communicate the way Andy does, where the first priority is protecting the players, managing their egos, trying to get ready for a football game the next Sunday, and replying to questions from a game that just happened, you're not really getting the Andy Reid that I'm evaluating. And unfortunately, that's a disconnect, because the fans are getting the Andy Reid that is communicating in a press conference. They're getting an Andy Reid that his whole priority is to defend and keep a very close circle in terms of what he does managing his players and his coaches. It's one of the reasons he's loved so much around the league and by his team. It's a tough media market, it's a big market. When you can sacrifice your own popularity for your players, believe me, it wins a locker room for a long, long time, and that's what he accomplishes. But he loses his ability to communicate the way he does with all of us. He may one-on-one with you guys, but that's what I face as the owner. I have a coach that handles press conferences and communicates with the media in a way that's incredibly protective of his team. That creates a tremendous unselfishness on his part, because he's going to suffer in popularity. That's the dynamic here. We all have to realize it. I think it's one of the reasons he's been so successful, but it's sometimes frustrating, and you know, I could use a line of Andy's and say, Andy's got to do a better job of that.
Hey, Jeff, will Howie Roseman still be your general manager?
Yes, he will. But I'm not going into questions of the organization, but absolutely.
Jeffrey, back to the press conference issue. As his boss, and we understand the reasons why he may, you know, kind of go different ways with things, but why do you permit him to be so arrogant and dismissive when really he's not speaking to this room? He's speaking to an audience oftentimes that's leaving a game after a loss, paying customers, people with personal seat licenses. Why do you permit that as the owner?
Right. I think, you know, it's a legitimate question, but to describe it as arrogant is completely wrong. It's protective. And there's a difference how you interpret protectiveness. You can convert it to arrogance if you misjudge it. There's no arrogance in this man. One of the analysis I do when I meet with Andy for met multiple times in the last month, and I do it every year, is how humble he is and how self-critical he is. That goes into my analysis. So you're dealing with a completely non-arrogant man who blames himself for a lot of the troubles of the team, and at the same time can openly talk to me about each player and each strength and weaknesses that he can't talk to the press about. So that's what our experience is. And I sometimes do feel bad as an organization that gets presented in a way that ever would be interpreted as arrogant, because this is, I don't think you're ever going to meet a head coach who's any less arrogant than Andy Reid.
Jeffrey, what's the message for fans who might look at this decision as status quo for the franchise? You know, regressed in the last 3 years, failed to live up to expectations this year. What do you tell fans that are feeling that this is just standing still?
Yeah, I think that, you know, in the last 4 years, no team in the NFC has made the playoffs more often than the Eagles. Defending NFC's champions until this year, and 3 straight years going back, advanced the furthest. So it's I think a proper analysis and a more rational analysis is to figure out where did it go wrong this year, and is this the right coach next year to maximize the talent we have and the opportunity we have. And for our fans, it's really a very confident yes, on my opinion. He's got all the ingredients to take the team to the playoffs and take them far. And the players love this guy. They're absolutely ready to roll with him. And he's not afraid. Another aspect of Andy, I'll just say, is he's not afraid to make changes. And you know, sometimes the changes work and sometimes they don't. But very few coaches will change quarterbacks and succeed. Change schemes and succeed. There's change GMs and succeed. So this is a man open to change. He's very little. There's very little rigidity in the Andy Reid that we all work with, and that's important, because if I felt there was too much rigidity, arrogance, and a sense of separateness, then I'd be changing coaches.
Does Andy have to win the Super Bowl next year to remain?
Every year, the goal is to win the Super Bowl. I think we'll let the process play out. There's no ultimatums. That's our goal, and every year that's the plan. And only one team can do it. There'll be 31 disappointed teams this year, but I got to tell you, nobody will lead this team or owner in anger and frustration, because that's where it's coming from.
Andy has 2 years left on his
When
deal.
you spoke to Andy Reid, did you express your disappointment and your anger and tell him that there was no legitimate excuse for this team?
Yes.
How did you express that?
Very directly. We have a long and very trusting relationship in terms of.
What did you say to him specifically?
Just what you just said. I said there's just, you know, there's people can bring up excuses from the outside, but there's no legitimate excuse on my part. This team was too talented. This team was poised to really succeed in a big way, and there's just no excuses to be 8-8 when you're an improved team on the field, theoretically, from the team that was defending the NFCs last year. So there was no legitimate excuse.
When you started these number of weeks of assessment, did you start out thinking there's a possibility that you could dismiss Andy Reid?
You know, I'm open to any possibility. There's no fear on my part with engaging in a change in a coaching search. That's nothing that I'm afraid of. You know, I like taking risks, and it's not out of the question. But there is such a buildup of understanding where this man comes from, what he has with the team at this moment in time, and what the potential is for next year, that there was no need to kind of go to the brink and say, yeah, this is really about to be a change about to be made. Not the case.
You said there's you know, he's trying to protect his players,
Yes.
and he's sacrificing his popularity.
Yes.
But there are a whole history and litany of great NFL head coaches who have protect their players but not sacrifice their popularity. Did you get that across to him?
You know, I did. I think that's an area where Andy can probably learn from some of those coaches that do protect their players. And but you know, it's not the easiest thing to do when a team is 8-8 and expected to be deep into the playoffs. I think it's an easy thing for a coach that's very protective of his players to be attacked and criticized. And you become more defensive as that process goes on. You're only human. So yes, I think there is an opportunity, and maybe you all can be helpful. And I know I am with Andy. Would love it if he could, create that balance of being very protective with his players as he is, but at the same time maybe find ways to communicate in small groups or interviews or something like that.
Jeffrey, Andy has 2 years left on his deal. Do you anticipate that changing? Do you anticipate?
Not at this point in time. No.
Jeff, you talk about Andy's handling the media, his relations with his players. What about something like draft evaluation? You haven't drafted a player on the defensive side of the ball that's been a key contributor to this team since 2005, Trent Cole. Is there some accountability for how quickly?
I think there is, but I think the analysis is complicated because we've had a pretty good defense. We've had a lot of veteran players we brought in that have been very successful that probably overplayed the draft choices. So I think if you look back just 2 years on defense, I know Andy and his team is very excited about Brandon Graham having a healthy offseason and should be a top-tier pass rusher. But we brought in a top-tier pass rusher because we didn't think Brandon was necessarily going to be very healthy this year. So, in today's NFL, it's a combination of draft, free agency, whatever. Every aspect has to be analyzed by everyone in terms of internally, and it's putting the pieces together.
And he is making those final calls.
Yes, he is, totally.
2 more questions.
Hey, Jeff, did you have to, throughout this process, and because Andy's been here so long, had success, you have comfort, there's that whole idea of the fear of moving on. Did you have to kind of check yourself to make sure that you did not have that?
Yeah, I don't. It's just not in me. I'm a risk taker, I don't know how many owners would have signed Michael Vick at the time and gone in different directions that we've had to go or chose to go. So that doesn't, the last search was Andy, the most successful coach in Eagles history, coming from Green Bay and not even a coordinator at the time. It doesn't give me any sense of pause to do that again, and I'm sure, as everyone knows, every coach doesn't last forever. We'll be doing that again.
Have you made your feelings known to Andy about, I know you don't want to tell us, but have you made your feelings known to Andy about his assistants and your opinion on Juan and anybody else?
It's a constant discussion, but I think one of the important things, and it's important in our locker room, is for Andy to have the final say. I want our players to understand that he's responsible for selecting his staff. If I had to tell Andy Reid what to do for offensive or defensive coordinator or something like that, I've got the wrong coach. I would just have the wrong coach if I didn't trust his judgment. And if he's wrong, then circumstances happen. But I have faith that next year we will have a far superior year to this year, and with great upside.
Will Joe Banner come back next year, Jeff? Will Joe Banner come
Yes.
back?
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you all.
Thank you.